Bryan Ellis, thank you so much for coming on to the Capital Raiser Show. I'm super excited to talk to you.
Thank you.
You're one of my idols in the capital raising space, although I just recently found out about you. So you climbed the scale very quickly. Very highly recommended by Adam Adams, which is also somebody that I'm really admiring lately. We went to the Raising Money Summit, and it was a phenomenal event. That's how I found out about you.
Sure.
I do want to go into your background real quick, but I won't steal all of your thunder. I know that you're a publisher. You have this magazine that came in a bag of goodies that we got at the Raising Money Summit. And you do a program. I'm not sure if it's something that you really sell, but it's something that you work with high-level individuals on raising capital.
Yes.
That's very exciting. You have a very strong podcast called SDI Talk. Is that right?
Yeah, Self-Directed Investor Talk. That's right.
Yeah, SDItalk.com.
Go along with Self-Directed Investor Magazine.
And you teach something that's called the one-day capital raise. We'll go into that. Why don't you tell the audience a little bit about your background first, so they can find out about you.
So, Ruben, my background is, it was probably not all that earth-shattering. I started life, my adult life, in the software business, and that treated me very well. But somewhere along the way, my first daughter was born, and I realized I didn't want to keep working 90 hours a week, which is what I'd kind of trained myself to do in that world. And so I studied some other ways to make money, and real estate was one of them. And to say I was bad at real estate to begin with, Ruben, would be an insult to people who were bad at it. I was awful. But ultimately, I figured out what I was doing wrong. And in my case, it was that I didn't understand that it was that real estate is as much about marketing as it is anything else. And once I closed that loop, I began to be pretty good at it. And so I started to build an email list in my local area of other real estate investors and started flipping deals to them, and mostly single family houses and that sort of thing. And along the way, I learned I could use that email list for lots of other things, like providing information about mortgages or other educational opportunities, et cetera, et cetera. And so I learned there were other ways I can monetize that email list. And that kind of exploded into, ultimately, I had a pretty big following. I've got a pretty big following to this day. And we ended up doing some capital raises for various projects, everything from just small things up to a $10 million project that we did not long ago. And on each one of them, I've used a strategy that I call the one-day capital raise. That is really where I focus most of my efforts in terms of helping clients today. So that's the 50,000-foot overview.
Yeah. So I know that you're in very high demand. People are willing to pay $25,000 a day to come and basically help you raise them some capital for whatever projects they do. In some cases, it's multifamily syndication. You also help people with oil and gas.
Yeah.
And then in regards to the self-directed podcast that you created, do you use that as a tool to educate people on all investment classes? Is it more about the use of and selection of the appropriate retirement vehicle? Tell us a little bit about your podcast that you're doing.
So I'll give you the official answer, and I'll give you the kind of the behind the scenes answer.
All right.
The official answer, and it's entirely true, is that there was no, and there remains no really good source of information about that topic. There are some people who talk about it, but only on a very surface level in my experience. And there are a couple of attorneys who talk about it, but most of them don't have the ability to speak English. They speak lawyer. And I wanted to fill the gap between the attorneys and the IRA companies, because I happen to know a lot about that sort of thing. I actually teach law on that topic through the University of California. And even though I'm not a lawyer, somehow they recognize that I know my stuff on that. And so I teach law through them. So I know my stuff in that world. And I happen to think that there was a pretty big demand, and I was right, for that type of information, how to use self-directed IRAs and solo 401ks and such to do alternative investing. And so that's the surface reason that I did it. But the deeper reason, and the reason that will make most sense to people who raise capital, is that people who are interested in self-directed IRAs and solo 401ks are people who have investment capital. Furthermore, they are people who have investment capital that must be invested. With that money, you're not competing with other things like a family vacation, buying a second home, or that sort of thing, that money in those accounts has to be invested. And so one of my big internal objectives was to build a following of people who were interested in alternative investing, so that when opportunities arose that I wanted to put in front of them, I would have a ready market. And that was the internal reason for it.
In this space that I'm involved with, multifamily syndication, one of the things that a lot of people are talking about is creating a thought leadership platform.
Sure.
And that can be a YouTube channel, a meetup, or in our case, a podcast. Tell us a little bit about, for the audience that's listening, what are some of the successful tips that you have for creating a big following and growing your podcast in such a way that you can utilize it?
Well, growing a podcast is something that is incredibly valuable because in my experience, the quality of leads you get from a podcast is those leads are higher quality than any other kind of lead. And I say that as one who has vast experience in email marketing and SEO. I used to do daily radio in San Francisco and Dallas and Atlanta. I write for Forbes. I write for Entrepreneur. I've written for thestreet.com, lots of really highly reputable places. And in my experience, the very best leads I've ever gotten have all come from my podcast. So that may be a pretty good tip for your listeners if they're looking for a way to build some kind of a thought leadership position for themselves. How do you build it? How do you grow it? Well, it depends on what resources are available to you. But I'd say the first and most important thing is make sure you have something to say, and that you say it frequently, and that you say it consistently. Get lots and lots and lots of content out there. Get lots of episodes out there. Make sure they're worthwhile. Make sure that they're good enough that whenever people listen to them, they think, I'm going to subscribe to this because it's good enough that I want to hear it again. And make sure it's good enough that they want to go back and hear everything from the beginning. I mean, it's been years since I started my show, Ruben, and it's pretty typical for me to get emails from people saying, I just found your show. I'm in the process of listening to everyone from the very beginning. And then for them to come right back to me and say they have listened to everyone. And I have over 300 shows. So that's our 300 episodes. So that's a pretty good general idea, is make sure the content is really, really good. But another one is leverage whatever you can. Like in my case, I had a big email list. And so I went ahead and did some really aggressive email campaigns to drive a lot of traffic to my new show. And I also did it in a really strategic way. Like back at that time, and to some extent still now, the goal was to get lots of ratings and reviews on iTunes. Now things have changed a little bit, but back then that was the currency. And so everything I did at the time was driven towards that goal, because if I did that, I was going to get a lot more listeners to my podcast automatically. And the result was we were number one out of the gate in that space, and have basically maintained that for a very long time. So that's the approach that I would take in general towards building and growing a podcast.
That's phenomenal advice, particularly for me, because I just launched my show and I just wanted to operate from ready, fire, aim. And
Sure.
I've been hearing that, hey, that might not be the best approach, but for me, at least it got me to get in front of people and to have conversations with people that are experts in raising money, which
Sure.
If there's nothing else that I ever get from this show is besides interviewing individuals like yourself, that's enough for me. That's phenomenal.
Sure.
I have a program that I listened to by Anthony Robbins called Mastering Influence about 10 years ago. It's been a while since I studied it, but it's all about the psychology of influence, the psychology of what to say to people and how to get them motivated to do certain things, and how to motivate yourself. Now, you have hired some people that are in the psychology space to help you with sales and being able to close people. Is this correct? Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, I've hired sales psychologists, and I've read all the books, both the popular books and the more academic varieties, with a mind towards understanding how best to communicate and to persuade and influence people. And you're right, it really is all about influence and the ability to lead people. That really, at the end of the day, Ruben, what everybody in the world wants, even though a lot of people never think to really ask for it, is everybody wants leadership. Everybody wants somebody to stand up and say, I'm the man or I'm the woman, follow me. And the more you can do that in a persuasive and credible way, the easier it is for you to get whatever you want out of life, so long as you continue to behave in a moral and ethical sort of way. So yeah, influence is a big, big issue. And frankly, a lot of that comes down just to the way you say what you say. And so that's really a big focus in my one-day capital raise program, is to help people understand not just what you need to say when, a very common example of this is, if you're doing a raise and someone comes to you and says, what is the minimum investment to get in your fund? Well, that's a very common question. And some version of that is a very common question. But the way you answer that, and I won't go into this unless you would like for me to, but the way you answer that can set you up for a big success or for disappointment. And that's one of the kinds of things that we teach at the One Day Capital Raise event.
So do you actually sell this event somewhere? How do people, okay, I see your website, onedayraise.com. Is this a new program that you've been doing, or is this something you've been doing for a long time?
So the answer is it's something that I've been doing for a long time, but the application specifically to capital raises is a fairly new thing. I've been involved in creating persuasive webinars and stage presentations for years. That's how you saw me first, is at the stage presentation I gave at Adam Adams' event. And I've been doing that sort of thing for many years. That is, in fact, why I took the time to hire sales psychologists and read all the literature and do all the study, is so that I would know how to do that sort of thing really well. But for some time now, I have been a behind-the-scenes person in the internet world, in the real estate world, and in other markets, helping people who have to create presentations that must be persuasive. And that's where it all came from. And I've actually been teaching that in the form of a 2-day seminar for some time. But we recently shifted towards focusing really on the capital raising market, because that's really what I love. That's the application of this content, this strategy that I love the most. And so really that's largely, other than a few of the really big name internet marketers who come to me to help them write their sales presentations, I'll probably continue doing that, because, whenever somebody wants to pay you $25,000 plus for a day to sit with them, it's kind of hard to turn that down. But other than that sort of thing, I'm probably going to be focused, and not probably, certainly going to be focused largely on the capital raising side of things quite exclusively.
No, I get it. I'm just like you. That's why I started the Capital Raiser show, because I wanted to learn and master that side of things. You had mentioned in a previous podcast with Adam Adams that there's a specific mindset shift that happens when you go from single family into multifamily, but you said an even bigger mindset shift takes place when you go from being I guess the person that directs the project to the person that raises the capital.
Yeah.
So that's a big deal for me. Tell us a little bit more about why is that so important?
Well, really, the question is the money in the deal, or is the money in the money? It can be both. And a deeper level, what I'm asking is, are you going to do better for yourself by becoming a masterful investor who raises capital to do your deals? Or are you going to make more money by becoming a masterful raiser of capital who can fund other people's deals and maybe get paid and take a piece of those deals? There's not a single straight answer for everybody. Having said that, it is my strong contention that if one learns to raise capital very quickly and to do so in a repeatable, consistent manner, then chances are pretty good you're going to be able to do a lot better taking a piece of a lot of deals than you will be by taking just the operator or the general partner part of just a few deals over the course of many years. And we're going to raise capital for probably in the next 12 months, I'm guessing conservatively between 10 and 20 different deals. And I'm going to have a piece of each one of those. And it's not going to be a tiny piece either. And so my contention here is that you've got to think seriously about the question of, is the money in the deal or is the money in the money? Because those two skills, finding and executing investments, and also finding and acquiring investment capital, those two skills are radically different skills. And it probably makes sense to focus on one or the other for most people.
For the one-day capital raise, tell us a little bit about that. I know that there's 6 steps, and I'll let you explain those.
Yeah, 5 or 6, depending on which version of it I'm sharing. Really, I kind of reduced it to 5 just to make it even simpler. The first step is lead generation, and everybody knows what that is. You're identifying the people who maybe might be interested in what you have to offer. And you can do that in a lot of ways, one of which, as we mentioned just a little while ago, is having a podcast. Now, there are other ways that are a little faster, that we do in fact talk about at the One Day Capital Raise event, but the podcast is a great way that generates high quality leads. But the second step, once you have a lead, what do you do with them? Well, the second step beyond that is to put them on a webinar, a presentation, a scalable presentation. And in that presentation, you make your case, but you don't make your case for your investment opportunity. You don't talk about your specific asset at all. And the reason you don't do that is because if you do so, you are guilty of what's called general solicitation by the SEC. Now, some forms of some capital structures allow that and some don't. But in my humble but entirely correct opinion, what I believe is that you should always decouple your marketing from your capital structure. And the best way to do that is for the webinar, the place where you drive these leads that you generate. On that webinar, what should happen is that you're educating people about the strategy that you're using. You're introducing them to your team. You're exposing them to your experience. Maybe you're even making the case why investing in a particular locale is something that does in fact make sense. You probably are going to show them some examples of deals you've done in the past, or the deals that your partners have done in the past. But in no time are you going to talk about the deal that you actually want them to invest in. You can't do that because you don't want to risk running afoul of the SEC's rules against general solicitation. And so what you do there is you just choose a different law that you're going to be subject to. Instead of pushing your investment opportunity, all you're doing is educating the public about investment strategy. And that tends to be enough such that when you get to the end of that presentation, you can say something like, look, there sometimes opportunities to do this type of investing do arise. And if you'd like to learn a little bit more about that, let's set a time and talk. Well, the beauty of doing that, Ruben, is that by this point, by the time you get to the point where you say, let's set a time to talk, you've pretty much told them everything they need to know to disqualify themselves. So you're not going to be hearing from people who aren't qualified after they go through that webinar process. And it means you don't have to do any more lunchtime or dinner time one-on-one meetings with capital investors. You don't have to get on the phone and hope and pray that the person you're talking to is interested or qualified or ready. None of that's relevant anymore, because whenever they respond to you after the webinar, chances are extremely high that you've got a really hot prospect. And so the call to action there goes on to the third step, which is the qualification call, or the disqualification call, as I sometimes call it. This is where you talk to that person briefly and find out if they really are who they say they are, if they've got the money that they need to have to be able to even talk about an investment with you, if they are in the stage of life where this is appropriate for them. And most importantly, or equally importantly, what you do is you find out if they are available and interested in coming to a very small meeting, a meeting that has generally 5, 10, 15 people, you and 5, 10, or 15 other people. And those other people are potential investors, people who have gone through the webinar process, who have proven that they have the capital that's necessary to invest with you, whose stage of life is right for that, and who are actually interested in that strategy. You invite those people to come to a small meeting. And at that small meeting, you basically go over the webinar again. I mean, we wouldn't really tell them that, but that's what you're doing, is you're going over the webinar content again. And if possible, maybe you drive them around and you let them see the particular asset that you are interested in having them invest in, because at this point, you're not general soliciting anymore. At this point, you actually have a relationship with these people. At this point, you've actually had them provide documentation about their financial situation. It really can't be plausibly argued that you don't have a relationship with these people anymore, because at this point, you've generated them as a lead. You've had them come on a webinar. They've watched the entire webinar, and you've got documentation of all this. They've responded to something you said on that webinar. You've spoken to them personally after that webinar. You've had them provide documentation to you about their physical or their financial situation. And then finally, they've physically traveled probably across the country to come and meet you for a one-day event where they get to learn more about what you're doing. That's a pretty good basis for a relationship. You're no longer general soliciting. And so at that one-day event, you kind of recap what the content of the webinar. You show them the asset if possible. You introduce them to your team. You give them a chance to shoot holes in everything you've said so that you have the chance to answer all their objections. And at the end of the day, the fifth step is close them. You give them the chance to actually sign on the dotted line and join your syndication. Those are the 5 steps of the one-day capital raise, and they just work.
So the one-day capital raise, it refers to the actual event, yes? The one where you close everybody?
That's right, because it's only on that day where you actually are inviting people to invest with you. Everything up to that point is just a marketing process.
So that marketing process, I have questions about that. How long does it take to generate the leads to get to that event?
That's a really good question. And the answer is it depends on the way that you are doing the lead generation itself. Like if you happen to already have a functioning podcast that has lots of listeners, it probably isn't going to take very long, a couple weeks. If you are starting from ground zero, it actually could still be as little as a couple weeks, depending on what you're doing. For example, there's some Facebook strategies that we're using that are showing incredible promise, incredible results, where we're able to do some targeting even after Facebook a couple of months ago really changed how much they allowed you to do targeting. Even after that, we're still seeing really good results based on the targeting features that are still available. You could also buy access to email lists. A lot of people who have email lists that are relevant to this type of thing will allow you to just pay them a certain amount of money and have them email to their database. And when they do that, you would be emailing an invitation to your webinar. And that would do handle the lead generation process for you, because they'd come and opt in to watch your webinar, and then they'd actually watch the webinar itself. And that's how the process works. So it can be really, really fast, even if you're starting from zero. If you're doing more conventional stuff, it might be a little bit longer, but frankly, I'm not sure why you would focus exclusively on the conventional stuff. And there's so many different things you can do that provide really quick results.
So for people in my business, in the multifamily syndication business, would you mind giving me like a 1-minute explanation of why someone should come to your event if they're raising capital for multifamily? Is what you're doing better than what a lot of people are doing?
Oh, yes. So what I'm doing is quite radically different than what most people are doing. I'll usually explain it this way, Ruben. Everybody knows somebody in the capital raising business. So whether you know them personally or not, but this person, they've raised hundreds of millions of dollars. It seems like everything they touch turns to gold. They did a capital raise last week and they raised $20 million in 20 minutes. And, everybody wants to be this person. Well, the fact is that person is probably pretty good at what they do. And we all know some people like that. But the problem with listening to that person teach you how to raise capital is that what works for them will not work for you. And it all comes down to one word, and that word is momentum. If you are somebody who has raised a lot of capital already, chances are your next capital raise is really going to be as easy as picking up the phone and calling a few people and seeing if they're interested. That's the nature of this business. It gets easier the longer you've been in it. But if that's not the case, if you don't have the ability to raise your money largely exclusively from your current relationships, then you have to have an entire system. You have to know how to generate the leads. You have to know how to qualify those leads to find out if they are even conceptually compatible. You have to be able to deeply qualify those leads to find out that they in fact do have the money and that they are interested. You then have to get proof, which means having them provide actual documentation that they are who they say they are. And then you have to have a way to pull that all together such that now that you have all these people that you know for a fact are in fact well qualified, you've got to have a way to actually get them to sign on the dotted line and turn over money to you. Well, that's why my one-day capital raise system is the absolute best there is for somebody who's just learning how to raise capital, or for anybody who's relatively new to it. Because no matter where you're starting from, we cover all of that as a matter of course. All of that is covered at the one-day capital raise training event, because you've got to have all of that. We assume that the clients that come to us are people who don't have all of the advantages, who don't have all of the assets in their corner that Mr. Everything Turns to Gold has. We assume that you don't have a big email following, that you don't have a podcast, that you don't have any name notoriety. And we show you how to overcome and thrive despite those limitations. So that's why what I do is different from, and I dare say infinitely better than, the way anybody else teaches how to do this.
So somebody looking to get into multifamily syndication or another type of business, they can go to your onedayraise.com, to your event, and then learn this system. Do you think at this point, if they don't have a team in place, that they can go and join a successful syndication company and say, hey, I can raise money now, I have the tools? Is that something that is viable for a person that wants to get into the business but doesn't know what value they can bring to a syndication team?
You mean subsequent to attending the one-day capital raise event?
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah. I mean, if that's what you want to do, probably what you should do is actually complete a raise successfully yourself first before you go and tell everybody that you are the master of it.
Okay.
Having said that, yeah, I mean, what you're going to find is that it is much simpler. There are far fewer moving parts, and it's just predictable when you use the method that I teach. I mean, Ruben, I am by training an engineer. For me, things have to be step by step by step and black and white. Otherwise, they simply don't make sense. And that's the way that I teach this program, so that you know exactly what to do the next day. And when that thing's done, you know exactly what to do the next day, and on and on and on. It's just a very, very clear process that anybody can follow if you're willing to follow some instructions.
Yeah, and I want to let the audience know that you have a lot of experience raising capital. You personally raised for your own deal 70 million or above, correct?
Yeah, for both a combination of my own deals and the other projects that I've worked on. Yes, absolutely. And we're going to raise probably that much again in the coming 12 months, certainly in the next 18 months.
So how big do you want to take this business? Where do you want to end up by helping people raise money?
Oh, it's a very selfish thing for me, I have to admit. So here's the reality. When I do these events, these 2-day events, let's just imagine there are 20 people in the room. Of those 20 people, 16 or 17 of them are going to go out and raise capital and do well for themselves. And that's great. That's what I want to see. 3 or 4 of them are going to come to me at the end of the event and say, Bryan, look, we need to raise some capital and we need to raise it right now. Can you help us? And if 3 or 4 people say that, that's probably going to mean that 1 or maybe 2 of them are interesting. Those are the people that end up paying me a large amount of money to sit with me for one day, because I'll then help them specifically build a process for raising capital for their thing. And at the end of that one day, typically what happens is they say, wow, this is a great presentation. I've got everything I need to make this happen, but I don't have any time. Will you go ahead and just run this process for me? And probably half of the time, because I've kind of filtered them at this point, probably half of the time I have some interest in doing that, because at this point I've spent a full day getting to know them, getting to know their deal, understanding why it's something that I can or cannot, as the case may be, make a really good case for. And so this is really just an extension of my investing for myself, Ruben, The goal is to end up with connections to and relationships with people who are putting together good deals themselves, so that if it turns out that I can help them in that way, that's great. But if not, at the end of the day, everybody that comes to the One Day Capital Raise event, they know how to do this for themselves. And so they can go do that, and we have people do it, and the thing is, it just works. It just works. If you just follow the system, it will work. And so how big do I want to take it? I'm going to do this until it bores me to tears, and I'm nowhere close to that. Look, I love this. Like, I love this stuff. Like the whole speaking so that people understand, and so that you are persuasive, and so that you help them and get what you want. That's what I'm all about. I mean, and I think I forgot to finish the example from earlier about the answer to the question of how do you answer what is your minimum investment? Can I give you a little example of what I mean about the power and what we teach at this event, so that people
Please.
really get a sense of it? So that question, what's your minimum investment amount, or how much capital do I have to invest with you? Let's just think about it. When somebody asks that question, that's a good thing, because that means that they're interested in potentially investing with you, right? So that's a good starting point. But the way I think about it, there are really two things in that question that we have to deal with. One of them is they want to get the info. They want to know what that number is, right? It's important. That's in your document somewhere. It says in your documents, it says minimum investment is, X, whatever that number happens to be. But there's something else behind that question frequently. And that is that there's an implicit downward negotiation that exists whenever someone asks that question. So if you ask me what's my minimum investment, and I say $100,000, not everybody, but some people are pretty immediately going to say, well, can I invest 50 instead? Or would you take 70 instead? Something like that. And I understand that. The vast majority of people who invest don't tell you how much money they actually have on day one. They've got more than they tell you, and I don't blame them. But let's think about it. If you just say my minimum investment amount is $100,000, you've given them the information, and that's good. But what you've done is you failed to recognize that there are two things in communication: content and context. Content is the information itself. It's the $100,000 limit. Context is the way you frame that so that they understand it in the way that you want them to understand it. So I might do something a little bit differently. I might say, well, the minimum capital quality we're looking for is $100,000. Well, what have we done there? If they ask us for less, they're asking to give us less quality. Now, who wants to be associated with being less quality than everybody else? Well, most people don't. And so that's going to, by itself, it's going to help. It's going to help you to limit the amount of time that you actually have to deal with the issue of whether you'll take less than your documents say you'll take. But there's one step beyond that even. If before you say the baseline capital quality that we accept is $100,000, if you say something like, while sometimes we'll accept more from very well qualified investors or from particularly desirable partners, our baseline capital quality is $100,000. Well, what has that done? Just by adding a simple phrase in front of answering the question, you've told them that they can invest more than the minimum and that they have to be really well qualified and particularly desirable to do so. Well, who wants to be well qualified and particularly desirable? The answer is everybody. Now, does this mean that person's going to give you more than your minimum? Sometimes it will. Usually, no. But what it almost always does, Ruben, is that it makes it be the case that you don't have to answer the question of, well, will you take 50 instead? Will you take 70 instead? You don't even have to deal with that because you framed the answer in such a way that they want to aspire to working with you rather than it simply being a matter of you aspiring to working with them. You want the desired dynamic to go in the right direction. And that's really what we do with the one-day capital raise strategy.
So how often do you have the one-day capital raise events?
We have 3 of them scheduled right now. The next one's going to be in Atlanta, and then we have one in LA and also in Las Vegas. Most of them are generally going to be in Atlanta or Las Vegas. We do them once every couple of months or so. But they generally get filled up pretty far in advance. So if a person's interested, they really ought to stop by the onedayraise.com website and check that out so that we can get you scheduled, because they do tend to fill up.
Do you have some, I know that you like to speak at events. Are there some engagements that you have scheduled so far?
You know, I do have a fairly full calendar. I've got, I just came back from London, and I was supposed to go to Singapore as well, and I ended up having to take a different path on that. But this month alone, I've got an event in Las Vegas that is not mine. I've got an event in Los Angeles, the Sam Freshman's event that I'll be speaking at. I've got 5 or 6 things throughout the rest of the year, but if you ask me what they are, the rest of them I couldn't begin to tell you.
No, it was more because I wanted to hear that I would be able to see you at Joel Block's event, who taught Bakerson how to invest, how to syndicate better said.
Yeah,
so I'm going to be there, and hopefully we'll cross paths at that event.
You know, I will be there for the first day of it, I believe. I won't be speaking. Joel and I are colleagues. He called me up a couple of weeks ago after seeing me on an interview I did with Adam, and he and I turns out probably are going to be doing some work together. So
nice.
Yeah, I'd love to see you there.
All right, cool. Well, we got to wrap up. Why don't you tell everybody how to get a hold of you? What's the best way? Should they call you? Should they reach out to you at your website?
Yeah. The best thing to do is go over to onedayraise.com, and there you'll learn a little bit more about the one-day capital raise system and be able to get some more information about that to see if it fits what you need, because it's good for a lot of people, and if it's good for you, it's probably going to be the best possible way for you to raise money quickly and predictably. So onedayraise.com is the place to go.
Okay, and then just to digress a little bit and be off topic, I'm curious about what you teach at the university.
So what I teach there is a continuing education course about prohibited transactions in IRAs. We do some 401k stuff too, but mostly in IRAs, because self-directed IRAs are really, really powerful. There's a lot of flexibility with them, but there are rules. You can't just invest them in any way you want to. And the problem with self-directed IRAs is if you mess up, if you break one of those rules, it's probably going to be financially cataclysmic, and there's not a whole lot you can do to fix it. So it's really, really important to understand what those rules are, what the prohibited transactions are. And the reality is most attorneys don't know. So if your attorney does know, there's a pretty decent chance that they learn that information from me. So that's what I teach at that program through the University of California.
Yeah, and just some additional props to you and your podcast. I think people should go and check it out. I listened to a couple of episodes, and there's some very valuable content on the self-directed world. So I appreciate your time, Bryan. I'm looking forward to seeing you. Hopefully we'll get a picture together. And then,
yeah, absolutely.
I can't wait to shake your hand. I missed you at the RMS at the Raising Money Summit. I didn't know that you were going to be taking off to London, but I promise to shake your hand next time I see you.
Pretty much had to get off stage and go to the airplane. So, but yeah, I'll look forward to meeting you in Las Vegas.
Awesome. Thank you so much for coming on the show. Enjoy the rest of your day, and I'll be in contact soon.
Thank you so much.
Take care.